Distinguished guests, President Ivanov, Your Excellencies, first allow me to thank the School of Young Leaders and the initiative for having me over for the second time to chair the key panel of the Cultural Forum. My name is Ivica Bocevski. I also would like to thank President Ivanov for the opportunity he gave me to serve my country in the capacity of the diplomatic advisor to the President of the Republic and as the first Macedonian ambassador to Brazil and to South America. If you look at the program, you'll see that I have a very long title nowadays. It's due to the fact that my country is still a candidate for membership in the European Union. It's a very sad story, and it reflects the opposite of the title of the panel, which is Leadership, Cultural Bridges and Legal Frameworks in Post-Conflict Reconciliation. Just to give you a perspective, when I was a teenager, my country was called Yugoslavia, and my Macedonia was only part of that Yugoslavia. As teenagers, we dreamt at that time, and we were hoping that us, the country, joining the European Union is just around the corner. We really expected that the moment the single act enters into force, on January the 1st, 1993, that besides the original 12 members of the European Union, also former Yugoslavia will join the European Union. What happened in the meantime? Poor leadership and blowing up of the cultural bridges, but also blowing up of the physical bridges led to unprecedented war, and also all the frameworks and fora for dialogue and reconciliation were deconstructed. Instead of us becoming members of the European Union, we were just silently watching our country collapse into the flames of war, and also we were watching our neighbors becoming members of the European Union. It's 2024, and my daughter became an adult. Still, my country is not a member of the European Union, unfortunately. It reflects what happens when there is a poor leadership and when we deconstruct the cultural bridges. So, President Ivanic, for the second time actually in my life, I was only a kid when I visited Bosnia and Herzegovina for the first time. But I was a 19-year-old student in 1995, just 6 months after the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement. And I remember at that time a delegation of the European students, including 2 Macedonians and 3 Slovenes. We visited the universities, both universities in Mostar, University of Banja Luka, universities of Sarajevo and Tuzla, and it was a horrible but also a life-forming experience for us to witness a country still divided, different uniforms. We received different stamps in our passports while traveling throughout Bosnia, and we thought that it's hopeless at that time, that the country does not stand a chance, especially when talking to our peers at the university. But there was a courageous generation of leaders, young leaders at that time, including yourself, who took the opportunity to start the reconciliation, even though in the meantime, we are seeing how pendulum in Bosnia always switches from reconciliation to ethnic nationalism back and forth. And my question to you is, President Ivanic, will the pendulum in Bosnia finally swing towards reconciliation and European integration? And is there something that the international community and forums such as this one can do in order to facilitate the reconciliation, to facilitate the European integration of Bosnia? Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for this nice introduction, Ivica. And at the beginning, I also really have a pleasure to be today here. And thank you, dear friend, President Ivanov, for inviting me in this session, and Academy, and all these organizers. If I have the real answer on that question, I deserve the Nobel Prize, because speaking about the Bosnia, it's not so easy, because Bosnia, from the historical point of view, was always in the time of the peace and always in the time of the conflicts. We typically said to each other, you know, it's so nice to live in Bosnia because people here with a different religion, different ethnicities could work together. But every 40 years, all of us become crazy and we start a war. So it's difficult to be at that time there. In the meantime, it's not so bad. It's relatively good. Now, there is a big challenge because the last war was really a war, because 3% of the population in Bosnia was killed. 40% of the population was displaced. Bosnia today looks different than before. It's not so mixed like it was. It's more collection of the territories where one group is majority. And, but honestly speaking, if I compare the difficulties of that war with the current situation, I think that Bosnia is the last, maybe last, successful example of international intervention, globally speaking. After the Bosnia, I cannot remember a case where the international community was so successful, because at the end of the day, we live in a relatively peaceful situation with a lot of tensions, but not the conflicts. And the reason for that, honestly, is because all the big players were together. This is the last time when the Russia, United States, European Union were together, having the same opinion. After that, I can't remember that, and if I see the situation in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Middle East, everywhere there was division, and immediately there was no solution. Internally, we have a lot of challenges, in spite of the fact that the war finished almost 30 years ago. Do we have a real reconciliation? Unfortunately, I cannot say yes. I have to say, until now, still the answer is no. Why? Because when you have some sort of the civil war within the country, there is something which is common. Everybody believes, all the sides believe that they are the victims. And if there is something common in Bosnia, this is the feeling that my part was a victim. All the others were wrong. We were only innocent, all the others were responsible. And there will be a need for a long time just to be patient enough to reduce these tensions and then to start to really rebuild the real reconciliation. Of course, the role of the leaders there is extremely important. You can have NGOs speaking nicely, trying to rebuild the trust among the people, but this will not have so big influence like the real political leaders who will promote that. Did we have it in the past years in Bosnia? No. I like examples, so I will say one example. At the beginning of my duty, when I was a member of the Presidency, I proposed to the other two members, I'm a Serb, Orthodox, there were two other members, Bosniaks, Muslims, Croats, Catholics. And so we don't have a single president. We have presidency, so that means I'm not the real president, I'm 1/3 of the real president, which is even more difficult than to be a president, because you have to negotiate with the others. And I proposed something which didn't happen until then, and even didn't happen after that, because we couldn't succeed. My proposal was that three of us will visit the places where the three ethnic groups suffered, were killed. That we will all go there together and to pay the tribute for the victims. And we said that we will not speak, we will be there just to put the flowers, that the religious leaders of that community will pray in front of other religious leaders and us, and that we will show to the public that we respect all the victims and let's try to rebuild a trust. Unfortunately, we didn't succeed because one member said, okay, two of you can have one place. I need two places because my part was the biggest victim. And we didn't succeed. Everything was agreed. Even the religious leaders agreed to that proposal. They believe it was good. And unfortunately, we didn't succeed that. So how we can build a trust among the people, which is the key if you are faced with a society with a conflict. The key is a trust among the ordinary people. That is the real challenge, how to build a trust, not immediately full reconciliation, but at least a trust that the other side is honest enough. Without the real leaders, it's very difficult. As I said, NGOs, they can have their role, media, they can have their role, definitely it's important, but as long as you don't have politicians ready to show that, it's very difficult to rebuild that. We didn't have these politicians. And because of that, I still believe that the real reconciliation is still not there. Bosnia, like a country, is not more complicated than Swiss or Switzerland or Belgium. It's not more complicated, but there is one big difference. They honestly accepted the rules. We are trying still to cheat, to make some Balkan ways to misuse the rules to be in a better position. Once we accept that, I think that we can be very optimistic about the stability of Bosnia. Bosnia is definitely needs, maybe even more than any other country of the region, to be a part of European Union. Once we are the part of the larger community, we are not so bad, because our internal differences then are immediately irrelevant. But as long as we are isolated, we are pressed to be, against each other. By being a member of the larger community, our internal differences are less relevant. We have to accept the rules developed somewhere else, not among us. So there are no real reasons for the political conflicts. Unfortunately, based on your experience, I may be even more pessimistic than you, because being so long in the politics, I experienced very strange behavior, especially from the Brussels. Because all these years when I was alone in the political scene, always formal statement was, our doors are open to you from the Western Balkans. I was in one informal dinner before the European Council meeting, when the key leader said, that was in 2006, after Croatia, there will be no more enlargement for the decades. Not one decade, but decades. And now we are 2 decades after that meeting, and maybe I'm becoming old, and because of becoming old, a little bit too pessimistic. My impression is that during my lifetime, there will be no more. There will be no enlargement in the European Union. And I said to a group of the colleagues, I'm ready to pay the lunch for all of you if I'm wrong. So, but I'm relatively experienced person to have these statements. So generally for the young generation, if you want to be the leaders, you have to take very often the steps which are not always welcomed by the public. If you want to be just politician, just do what the public expects and you will be successful. But the real leaders, they have to do from time to time something which is not always completely accepted by the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President Ivanic. We don't want to be so pessimistic, even though I have to remind you of the fact that the official who started the Turkish negotiations with the European Union has just died. Yeah, so unfortunately, those things can take a very long time. But speaking of real leadership, today we also have on our panel First Minister Salmond, and I would like him to talk on the outcomes of 2 referenda and the reconciliation after those 2 referenda. In the first case, you led the effort to resurrect an old nation, the Scottish nation, and the referendum was very tight, though at the end the Remain vote in that case produced a result. You led also the reconciliation effort after that referendum. You've heard us and our aspirations to join the European Union, yet another referendum led your country to leave the European Union, even though Scotland voted to remain in the European Union. Right now, we're also part of the efforts to reconcile both the British and the Scottish society after those events. Fortunately, in your case, the referendum did not end up in violence, such as in Bosnia. We remember that the referendum in 1992 ended up in a full-blown war afterwards. So is there a lesson that Scotland can teach us, the rest of Europe, about how to deal with the outcomes of the democratic vote, even if the vote does not express our deepest feelings, aspirations, and agenda? Thank you.
Well, Chairman, I'm always reluctant to teach lessons to other people in other countries. And can I just say to the President here that if I say anything wrong, then I will not be buying lunch for lots of people. I'm Scottish, after all. We don't do these sort of things. The process is quite interesting. There were many successful things about the process of trying to reclaim Scottish independence. There was no violence. I mean, Scotland is not unique in the world, but it's unusual in that the process of self-determination in the modern era in Scotland, in the democratic era, has been achieved without a single person losing their life. In fact, nobody's had so much as a nosebleed. I think the worst excess in the entire referendum campaign of 10 years ago was that somebody got an egg thrown at them, you know, which is hardly in the great excesses of politics. So that was an extraordinary success. And that was enabled, of course, because people on each side of the argument knew that there was a process by which the argument could be decided, i.e. a referendum, a square go, as we might call it in the Scottish vernacular, an even contest whereby people could to resolve a situation. Now, that's a successful thing, and of course it's not just one side. I mean, that has to be agreed by both sides. There's no point having a one-sided agreement. That wouldn't achieve anything. And I suppose the Edinburgh Agreement I signed with David Cameron in 2012, David Cameron being the United Kingdom Prime Minister and the lead unionist, is an example of an agreement whereby two opposing sides, came to a decision to hold a referendum and agreed to abide by the outcome. So all that's successful. There hasn't been violence since the referendum, but of course there have been very negative consequences. I mean, negative consequences because of the result. I mean, negative consequences for Scotland in that, as you rightly say, Scotland, because it's not independent, despite the fact that every single area and district of Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, every single one, all 32 districts, was taken out of the European Union because of the predominance of the votes in England against. So that's clearly a major negative consequences. There are many others I could point to. The wastage of resources, not just oil and gas, but the renewable resources in terms of the lack of benefit for the Scottish people. I mean, we have been the only country in history to discover oil and gas in substantial quantities and become relatively poorer. And we seem like we're well on the road to becoming the country which produces 10 times its electricity requirements and yet has a substantial percentage of its old people who freeze in the winter. And that sort of fuel poverty among energy plenty is a dreadful situation. So there's been negative consequences for Scotland. What's less understood is the negative consequences for England. It is a reasonable supposition that if Scotland had voted for independence, then England 2 years later would not have voted to leave the European Union. I mean, for a start, David Cameron would have resigned as Prime Minister, as I resigned as First Minister when I lost the referendum. If he'd lost the Scottish referendum, he would have resigned as Prime Minister. It was his commitment to have the referendum on the European Union. But also the whole nature and psychology of that referendum would have been fundamentally different, if indeed it had taken place at all. So that has been a huge diminution of the United Kingdom's role in the world. And of course, if you look at the UK political scene now, The two major parties of state, the parties which have ruled the United Kingdom for the last 100 years, in the case of the Conservative Party for much longer than that, are both in huge disarray. I mean, the Labour Party has just won an enormous election victory, and 2-3 months later is flat on its back. You know, seems unable to govern. And the Conservative Party are just going through a leadership contest where the candidate who was emerging as the most formidable candidate has probably been knocked out by the votes of the members of the Parliament before they got to send him to the Conservative electorate. So both major parties of state are in disarray. The economy is in serious trouble. The social life of England has huge tensions. There's a rise of a populist right-wing party which threatens the political establishment. So the interesting thing is, although Scotland obviously lost an opportunity, the UK has been diminished. And just one further point. Although, you know, in referendum, you must expect outside influences of some kind or another. The European Union of that time, President Barroso in particular, was not helpful at all to Scotland. I sympathise greatly with your difficulties at the present moment. I think it's fair to say that President Juncker, his successor, would have taken a different stance because he was a Prime Minister of a small country. But Barroso was not at all helpful. In fact, was secretly combining with the United Kingdom or the UK government. Well, what happened as a result of that is the UK, as one of the major players in the European Union, ended up leaving 18 months later. So in many ways, it was a bad outcome for Europe as a whole. On the subject of what we're talking about, to reconcile differences, you need a legal framework. You need a situation where people are prepared to say that is the treaty or agreement or understanding. You certainly need leadership because usually to get that framework in place requires the leaders of various parties or countries or factions to go beyond their own particular interest and try to understand the interests of the other side. And I do think very strongly you need the cultural bridge release. And Northern Ireland, which we might come to later, would be a very positive example of how cultural understanding has helped promote a peace which seemed so elusive for so long. My general message is respect for legitimate democratic aspirations leads to good outcomes. Disrespecting it in one way or another, and often surprisingly, can lead to bad outcomes for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor here to have Yossi Beilin, the architect, leading architect of Oslo and Geneva courts. Minister Beilin, we would like to hear your experience on working, designing and implementing those both accords. And can your experience with Oslo and Geneva serve as a path for reconciliation between Israel and Palestine nowadays, and also for a wider reconciliation in the region of the Middle East, which will potentially bring peace to the Eastern Mediterranean and diminish those negative consequences that we face right now in this moment? So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, the Oslo Agreement was an interim agreement, and one of its downsides was that it was perceived by the world and in a way by the parties as a permanent peace agreement. After all, very few people get into the details of agreements. The agreements are very boring. And so those who wrote the agreements usually know what they wrote. It's not the rule, by the way. But the assumption is that they know what they wrote, that they read the annexes, that they know the details. But the general public is not required to read every word. And usually it is pictures, and those who remember, the picture of the Oslo agreement was a tall young person with two other leaders on his two sides. The tall guy was the new American president who had no experience in international affairs, needed badly a success. And we brought him this success without any involvement. So he was very happy. And made out of it a big, big deal. So that people, and the others were, of course, Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat. So the world was very happy. I mean, any agreement by the two sides, like the Dayton Agreement. I mean, okay, you have an agreement, Dayton, fine. We are very happy that the two rivals got an agreement at the end of the day. We can write a V, it's okay. But Oslo was the beginning. And the international enthusiasm around Oslo became very soon the enemy of the continuation, because people were very frustrated. How come you signed a peace agreement? Why do you still kill each other? Stop it. So I believe that there was a mistake. Oslo was a continuation of a process, of the Madrid process, and it was agreed in advance that it would be only an interim agreement. But I think that our biggest mistake was not to insist upon having a permanent agreement immediately, without waiting for, trust and confidence buildings and all these things, which are important, but take time. And we don't have time. Time is running. So it was very easy among the two delegations which met for the first time, because the Israelis were forbidden from talking to the PLO organization people. And we met for the first time in Norway on the 20th of January 1993, 4 days after this, there was the law passed in the Knesset, which enables us to meet with the other side. So this was by itself the revolution, to meet legally with the other side. And it was so easy to create good relations with the other side, to understand the other side. Because the biggest secret is not necessarily that they trust each other, but that they have the same goal. And our same goal was to succeed and to have an agreement. So in the negotiating room, in the secret negotiating room, it was the easiest thing to do. What happened later on is that, in a way, there was, I believe, too much trust. I think that the point of too much trust is not taken seriously. Because what is happening in the negotiating room, which is a very unique room, and not enough was written about it. The dynamics in the negotiating room create, for example, a club of negotiators from both sides. Their main aim very soon become negotiating with whom? With their bosses. And they are telling them, no, we asked you, don't give up on this point or another point. And the negotiators are saying, Mr. Prime Minister or Mr. President, but we got something else that was very important for us. So this is the negotiations which is taking place. But what is the exaggerated trust? The trust which is built in the negotiating room is the trust between negotiators, not between peoples. And if I may, I can give you an example. And it is, I think, a very, very telling example. Because at a certain point, and not at the end, at the beginning, the Palestinian side said, one of the articles of our interim agreement should be that until we have a permanent agreement, Israel stops all the settlements in the occupied territories, in the West Bank and Gaza. Now, for us negotiators, it was not something totally crazy. All of us were against settlements. So it wasn't such a big deal that the other side is asking us to stop settlements. We talked with Prime Minister Rabin and said this is for them a crucial issue. 5 years, can you imagine, 5 years of interim agreement, and all these 5 years, the Israeli side is building territory, settlements. So we have to agree to freeze it. Rabin said, no. Take into account the government resolution 360 from 92. It was a very important resolution, which actually said that Israel unilaterally stops the settlements. It had many reservations, whether public constructions or private or whatever, but this was a very important statement that he, Prime Minister Rabin, wanted to tell the world, I am doing it by myself. Here come the Palestinians and say, now you have to stop settlements. Hey, I did it. So tell the other side that it is not needed, and if I agree to it, it will be seen as if I surrendered to the Palestinians in doing something which I wanted to do. And I have a resolution, public, you can look at it. Here comes the trust. We talked to our counterparts and said, you know, Rabin has a case. Although we agree with you that we should stop it, we should officially stop it, but for him, you can trust it. He is a man of his word, and nobody is going to deceive you, and there will be no settlements, actually. They consulted, they did not like the idea. Eventually, they came to us and said, we agree to it. For Rabin, it was a very big achievement. But it was a huge mistake. A huge mistake. Why? Because it was part of the agreement. It was not a special, I mean, after a few years, as you know, Rabin was assassinated. Somebody else replaced him. Immediately it was Peres, but after a few months it was Bibi Netanyahu. And Netanyahu said, I mean, the peace camp in Israel said, you should stop the settlements. And he said, show me, where is it written? Do you have some proof? And we said, no, it was trust. You know this name, this word, trust? There was a mutual trust, and we said that we will not build settlements. He said, with all due respect, if it is not part of the agreement, I don't have to fulfill it. And I think that for any negotiator, it is very, very important. Don't be misled by the trust which is created in the room of the negotiators, because they are there temporarily. They can be replaced politically. They may retired, they may die, and some of them even may be assassinated, God forbid. So if you want to have